The transport cruiser Orion shuddered violently as it entered the outer atmosphere of Tarian 5. Warning klaxons blared throughout the vessel, bathing the corridors in pulsing red light. 7-year-old Aaliyah Summers clutched her stuffed elephant tighter as the ship lurched again, throwing her parents against the safety restraints of their seats. Hull integrity compromised in sectors 3 through 7, announced the automated system with disturbing calm. Gravitational anomaly detected. Brace for emergency protocols. Aaliyah's mother reached across the narrow space between their seats, her fingers trembling as she squeezed her daughter's hand. Remember what we practiced, sweetheart. Get to the escape pod if anything happens. But Mom, no buts. Your father and I will be right behind you. Her mother's smile didn't reach her eyes. Promise me, Aaliyah. The ship jolted violently, sending loose equipment crashing across the cabin. Through the viewport, Aaliyah could see swirling green clouds rushing toward them at terrifying speed. Her father unfastened his restraints and pulled Aaliyah from her seat. Eleanor, we need to go now, he shouted to her mother over the screaming alarms. Her mother nodded, grabbing the emergency kit from under her seat. The family joined the panicked crowd pushing through the corridor toward the escape pods. Suddenly, a massive impact rocked the ship. Metal screamed as it tore apart. Aaliyah felt herself being pushed toward the escape pod section by her father's strong hands. Go now, he shouted over the cacophony of destruction. Dad, please, Aaliyah cried, tears streaming down her face as she clung to his sleeve. We'll be right behind you, he promised, his eyes filled with a desperate love that even at 7, Aaliyah recognized as goodbye. He pressed something into her hands, her mother's locket, before pushing her firmly into the escape pod. The last thing Aaliyah saw before the escape pod doors sealed was her parents running back to help other passengers as a section of the ceiling collapsed behind them. Then came the disorienting sensation of ejection, the violent shaking as the pod tore through Tarian 5's atmosphere, and finally the bone-jarring impact as it slammed into the alien soil. Silence followed. Terrible, complete silence. Aaliyah remained curled in a protective ball for what felt like hours before daring to uncurl her body. Pain shot through her right leg when she tried to stand. The pod's door had been wrenched open during impact, and greenish light spilled inside. Through the opening, she could see a sky unlike any she'd ever known. Swirling emerald clouds drifting across a jade expanse. On the horizon, a massive Smeridine moon hung impossibly large. Mom? Dad? Her voice sounded small and wrong in the alien air. No answer came except the distant echoes of strange animal calls. Struggling to her feet, Aaliyah limped to the doorway, clutching her stuffed elephant in one hand and her mother's locket in the other. The landscape outside was both beautiful and terrifying. Tall, slender trees with silver bark stretched toward the green sky, while knee-high purple grass swayed in the gentle breeze. Several hundred yards away, parts of the Orion lay scattered and burning, sending plumes of black smoke into the atmosphere. Aaliyah took a deep breath and stepped out of the pod. The air tasted strange, slightly metallic with hints of something sweet, like the cinnamon rolls her mother baked on special occasions. The memory sent a fresh wave of grief through her small body, but she forced herself to focus. She needed to find other survivors. Hello, she called louder this time. Is anyone there? Her injured leg gave way, and she collapsed onto the purple grass. The fall sent fresh waves of pain through her body. Examining her leg, she found a deep gash running from knee to ankle, bleeding steadily. She tried to remember her first aid training, but panic clouded her thoughts. With trembling hands, she tore a strip from her shirt and tried to bind the wound, but blood quickly soaked through the thin fabric. The sun began to set with alarming speed. Within minutes, the landscape darkened, and the emerald moon cast eerie shadows across the unfamiliar terrain. Strange sounds emerged from the surrounding vegetation. Clicks, howls, and something that resembled laughter, but was decidedly not human. A rustling in the purple grass nearby made Aaliyah freeze. Something was moving toward her, something low to the ground and fast. In the dim moonlight, she caught glimpses of a sleek, predatory form with too many legs and gleaming eyes. Aaliyah dragged herself back toward the escape pod, leaving a trail of blood in the purple grass. The creature followed, emitting a high-pitched sound that might have been excitement or hunger. The temperature dropped rapidly as darkness settled, and her breath fogged in front of her face. She huddled in the relative safety of the damaged pod, clutching her stuffed elephant for comfort. Mom and Dad will find me, she whispered to herself, even as tears froze on her cheeks. They promised they'd be right behind me. But as the alien night deepened, so did the terrible knowledge that she was completely alone. The creature outside circled the pod, occasionally scraping against the metal hull. Exhaustion and blood loss made Aaliyah's thoughts fuzzy. As her eyes grew heavy, she clutched her mother's locket and prayed that morning would come before the creature found a way inside. A different sound outside the pod made her freeze. Something was moving through the grass, something large. The predator that had been stalking her went suddenly silent. Aaliyah held her breath as the footsteps grew closer. A shadow fell across the pod's entrance. Standing there was the tallest being Aaliyah had ever seen. At least 7 feet tall with slender limbs and a graceful posture, the creature had skin the color of a clear earth sky. Its eyes were the most startling feature, large, almond-shaped, and emitting a soft glow that illuminated the darkness around them. The being wore simple clothing made from what appeared to be woven plant fibers, adorned with small, luminescent stones. Behind this first figure stood several others, similar in appearance, but varying in height and the intensity of their glowing eyes. They carried spears with crystalline tips that caught the moonlight. One of them thrust a spear into the grass, and a shriek pierced the night as the predator that had been stalking Aaliyah fled or died. The tallest one knelt down to Aaliyah's level, maintaining a respectful distance. When it spoke, the words were incomprehensible, but the tone was gentle. It extended a 4-fingered hand, palm up, in what seemed to be a universal gesture of peace. Aaliyah shrank back, remembering her mother's warnings about strangers. "Stay away," she said, her voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. The blue-skinned being tilted its head, then pointed to her injured leg before mimicking a drinking motion. It reached slowly to its side and produced a small flask made from what looked like a hollowed-out fruit. The being took a small sip first, then offered it to Aaliyah. Her thirst warred with her caution. Hours had passed since she'd had anything to drink, and her throat felt like sandpaper. Still, she hesitated. "I can't," she said, shaking her head. "My mom says not to take things from strangers." The being seemed to understand her reluctance. It placed the flask within her reach and backed away several steps, giving her space to decide. Another creature from the group approached, this one shorter and with eyes that glowed a softer blue. It carried something that resembled a leaf wrapped around a paste-like substance. It too placed its offering near Aaliyah before retreating. Pain and thirst eventually overcame her fear. Aaliyah reached for the flask and sniffed its contents. The liquid inside smelled sweet, like honeysuckle. She took a tiny sip. The flavor was unlike anything she'd tasted before, refreshing and energizing. Almost immediately, she felt her pain begin to subside. Emboldened, she tried the paste. It had a numbing effect when she applied it to her wound, and to her amazement, the bleeding slowed. She looked up at the beings with newfound curiosity rather than fear. The tallest being made a sound that might have been approval. It pointed to itself and said clearly, "Saren, Saren," Aaliyah repeated. Then pointing to herself, she said, "Aaliyah." Saren nodded, then gestured toward the dark forest. Several of the beings ignited torches that burned with blue flames, illuminating a path through the trees. Saren extended a hand again, clearly inviting her to follow. Aaliyah looked back at the wreckage of the Orion in the distance, then at her injured leg, then at the increasingly dark landscape filled with unknown dangers. With tremendous reluctance, she took Saren's hand and allowed herself to be helped to her feet. The journey through the forest was slow due to Aaliyah's injury, but Saren and another being supported her weight between them. The group moved with practiced stealth, freezing whenever unusual sounds emanated from the darkness beyond their torchlight. Twice they changed direction to avoid something Aaliyah couldn't see, but that clearly concerned her escorts. After what seemed like hours, they reached a clearing where dozens of structures stood. Dwellings made from the silver trees, arranged in concentric circles around a central fire pit where blue flames danced. More of the blue-skinned beings moved about the settlement, some carrying spears or bows, others tending to various tasks. As they entered the community, many stopped to stare at Aaliyah. Children, or what she assumed were children based on their smaller size, peeked out from behind adults, their glowing eyes wide with curiosity. Some pointed at her pale skin or dark hair, whispering in their melodious language. One small Lurian child, bolder than the rest, approached Aaliyah and reached out to touch her stuffed elephant. Aaliyah hesitated, then offered the toy. The child's eyes glowed brighter with delight as it examined the unfamiliar object, running blue fingers over the worn fabric. Aaliyah, Aaliyah said, pointing to her toy. The Lurian child attempted to repeat the word, the sound strange but recognizable. It was the first moment of true connection, and despite everything, Aaliyah found herself smiling. Saren led her to a dwelling near the center of the settlement. Inside, the single room was surprisingly cozy, with soft bedding made from woven fibers and walls decorated with intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer in the light of small, glowing crystals embedded in the ceiling. An elderly being sat near a small fire pit in the center of the dwelling. Its skin was a paler blue than the others, and the glow of its eyes had dimmed to a gentle pulse. It looked up as they entered, its gaze immediately fixing on Aaliyah with what seemed like astonishment. Saren spoke to the elder in their melodious language. The conversation went back and forth for several minutes, with occasional glances at Aaliyah. She caught what sounded like her name spoken several times, along with words that might have been Orion and human. Finally, the elder nodded and gestured for her to sit. A younger being entered with a bowl of what appeared to be stew. The smell made Aaliyah's stomach growl loudly, reminding her she hadn't eaten since before the crash. After Saren took a spoonful first to show it was safe, she devoured the meal. It tasted earthy and rich, with unfamiliar spices that warmed her from the inside. That night, as she lay on the soft bedding they had provided, Aaliyah finally allowed herself to cry. Silent tears for her parents, for the other passengers, for the life she had lost in an instant. Outside, the blue-skinned beings, the Lurians, as she would later learn they called themselves, began to sing. Their voices rose and fell like wind through trees, a hauntingly beautiful sound that reminded her of her mother's lullabies. "I miss you," she whispered, opening her mother's locket to reveal the tiny holographic images of her parents, their smiles frozen in time. "I don't know what to do without you." Despite her grief and fear, Aaliyah eventually drifted to sleep, the Lurian song following her into dreams filled with green skies and glowing eyes. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Aaliyah's leg healed completely thanks to the Lurians' medicinal pastes and her own youthful resilience. Adapting to life among the aliens proved challenging in ways both expected and surprising. The food, while nourishing, lacked the salt and sugar she craved. The language, with its flowing syllables and subtle tonal shifts, frustrated her young mind. Even gravity felt slightly wrong, just enough to make her movements awkward compared to the graceful Lurians. But children adapt quickly. Aaliyah learned fragments of their language, enough to communicate basic needs and ideas. Saren became her primary caretaker and teacher, showing remarkable patience as she struggled to pronounce the fluid syllables of Lurian speech. She learned that the Lurians were a peaceful people who had inhabited Tarian 5 for countless generations. Their glowing eyes were not just for seeing in darkness, but served as a defense mechanism against the planet's numerous predators, many of which feared light. The mysterious healing properties of their medicines came from their deep knowledge of the local flora, cultivated over millennia. Aaliyah's days fell into a routine. Mornings were spent learning to identify edible plants and how to avoid the dangerous ones. Afternoons were dedicated to language lessons and helping with community tasks like weaving or food preparation. Evenings were for stories around the central fire, where Lurian history and legends were shared through song and dance. She still cried herself to sleep some nights, missing her parents and the life she'd known. But the Lurians never rushed her grief or made her feel unwelcome. They simply continued to include her in their daily lives, treating her as one of their own. 6 months after her arrival, disaster struck. A terrible storm swept across the region, bringing winds strong enough to uproot the silver trees and torrential rains that flooded the lower areas of the settlement. The Lurians worked frantically to secure their homes and save their food stores. Aaliyah, determined to help, joined a group of young Lurians carrying supplies to higher ground. As they crossed a normally shallow stream, now a raging torrent, the makeshift bridge collapsed. Aaliyah and 2 Lurian children were swept away by the current. The water was icy cold and disorienting. Aaliyah fought to keep her head above the surface, gasping for breath whenever she could. One of the Lurian children managed to grab onto a fallen tree, but the other floundered nearby, its glow dimming with fear and exhaustion. Without thinking, Aaliyah kicked toward the struggling child. Her smaller, denser human body cut through the water more effectively than the Lurian's lighter frame. She reached the child and grabbed its arm, then used her free hand to seize a protruding root along the bank. With strength born of desperation, she pulled both of them towards safety. Adult Lurians arrived moments later, helping them onto solid ground. The child Aaliyah had saved was Saren's youngest, a fact she learned only after returning to the settlement. The rescue changed her status among the Lurians. No longer was she just the strange alien child they had taken in out of compassion. She was now someone who had risked her life for one of their own. That night, as the storm raged outside, the elder Lurian summoned Aaliyah to the central dwelling. There, in a ceremony she only partially understood, she was given a simple bracelet woven from fibers of the silver trees and adorned with a single luminescent stone, a mark of belonging. The seasons changed, marked by subtle shifts in the green sky and the behavior of local wildlife, rather than significant temperature variations. Aaliyah grew taller, her body adapting to the slightly different gravity and nutrition. Her language skills improved until she could converse fluently with any Lurian in the settlement, though certain concepts remained challenging to translate. On the anniversary of her arrival, Saren took her on a journey to a high ridge overlooking the crash site of the Orion. Much of the wreckage had been reclaimed by the purple grass and local vegetation, but pieces of the ship still protruded like strange metal monuments. "Why did you bring me here?" Aaliyah asked, her throat tight with emotion. "To remember," Soren replied simply. "The past shapes us but does not define us. You are both human and now partly Lurian. This is where that journey began." Aaliyah nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words despite her young age. She had been raised by two cultures now. 8 years of human upbringing, followed by nearly 3 years among the Lurians. She was neither fully one nor the other, existing in a unique space between worlds. Together, they created a small marker from stones and pieces of the ship's hull, a memorial to those who had been lost. As they worked, Aaliyah spoke of her parents, sharing memories she feared forgetting. Her mother's laugh, her father's storytelling voice, the way they had looked at each other when they thought she wasn't watching. Saren listened without interruption, his glowing eyes focused entirely on her, absorbing her grief and offering silent companionship in return. When the memorial was complete, he taught her a Lurian morning song, haunting notes that seemed to float on the wind back toward the stars from which she had fallen. The next day, as Aaliyah was gathering berries with several Lurian children in the forest, a thunderous roar filled the sky. Looking up, she saw a massive ship descending through the clouds, a human vessel, emblazoned with the Earth Alliance insignia. "Humans!" she shouted, dropping her basket and running toward the landing site despite the Lurian children's confused calls. By the time she reached the edge of the forest overlooking the clearing where the ship was landing, Saren and several adult Lurians had caught up with her. They stood back, spears ready but not threatening, as the ship's ramp extended to the ground. A dozen armed soldiers in Earth Alliance uniforms emerged first, weapons at the ready. Behind them came a tall man with broad shoulders and close-cropped gray hair. Captain Reese Key, according to the nameplate on his uniform. Aaliyah broke free from Saren's protective grip and ran toward the humans, her heart pounding with a mixture of joy and anxiety. "Here! I'm here!" she shouted. The soldiers trained their weapons on her until Captain Key held up his hand. "Hold fire," he commanded, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of the human child emerging from the alien forest. "Are you from the Orion?" he asked as she approached. Aaliyah nodded, suddenly feeling shy. It had been so long since she'd spoken to another human. The English words felt strange in her mouth after so much time speaking the Lurian language. "I'm Aaliyah Summers. My parents were Samuel and Eleanor Summers." Recognition flashed in the captain's eyes, followed by something that looked like pity. "We know who you are, Aaliyah. We've been searching for survivors for a long time." "Are there others?" she asked, hope rising in her chest. "Did my parents make it?" The captain knelt down to her level, his expression grave. "I'm sorry, Aaliyah. You're the only survivor we've found." The words hit her like a physical blow, even though part of her had known the truth for years. She swayed on her feet, and suddenly Saren was beside her, a steadying hand on her shoulder. The soldiers raised their weapons at the Lurian's approach, but Aaliyah stepped protectively in front of her friend. "No, they saved me. They've taken care of me all this time." Captain Key studied the blue-skinned beings with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "You've been living with them? These aliens?" "They're called Lurians," Aaliyah said firmly. "And yes, they found me after the crash. They healed my injuries and gave me a home. The captain gestured for his soldiers to lower their weapons. He approached Saren slowly, then extended his hand in a human greeting. I am Captain Reese Key of the Earth Alliance. Saren looked at the outstretched hand, then mimicked the gesture, clasping the captain's hand in his own blue one. Saren, he said simply. That evening, humans and Lurians sat together around the central fire of the settlement. Through Aaliyah's translations and a lot of patience on both sides, the basics of communication were established. Captain Key explained that the Earth Alliance had detected the Orion's distress signal years ago, but had only recently been able to mount a rescue mission due to the planet's remote location and the dangerous gravitational anomalies surrounding it. We assumed there were no survivors, he admitted. Finding you alive is miraculous. Saren spoke at length, with Aaliyah doing her best to translate his explanation of how they had found her and why they had taken her in. The Lurian elder joined the conversation, revealing through gestures and the few human words he had learned from Aaliyah that this was the first contact they had ever had with beings from another world. As the night wore on, Captain Key pulled Aaliyah aside. We'll be leaving tomorrow, he said gently. It's time to take you home. Aaliyah looked around at the Lurian settlement, at the dwelling that had been hers for 3 years, at the children she had played with, at Saren, who had become a second parent to her. This is my home now, she said softly. The captain shook his head. You're a human child, Aaliyah. You belong with your own kind, with proper education and medical care. Your aunt and uncle on Earth have been waiting for news about you. The mention of family she had almost forgotten stirred complicated emotions. Can Saren come with me? That's not possible right now, Captain Key said, but I promise you, this first contact is just the beginning. We'll establish proper diplomatic relations with the Lurians. You've given us an incredible opportunity here. That night, Aaliyah couldn't sleep. She slipped out of her dwelling and found Saren sitting alone by the dying embers of the central fire. I don't want to leave, she confessed, sitting beside him. Saren's eyes glowed softly in the darkness. In his heavily accented English, which he had been learning from the human visitors, he said, You must go. Learn. Grow strong. Remember us. I'll never forget you, Aaliyah promised, tears streaming down her face. And I'll come back someday. Saren nodded, placing a cool blue hand against her cheek. Aaliyah of Earth, first friend from stars, you always welcome here. The next morning, Earth Alliance soldiers loaded supplies and equipment onto their ship. Captain Key had spent hours in discussion with the Lurian elders, establishing the groundwork for future diplomatic missions. As a gesture of goodwill, he left behind several communication devices with solar chargers and basic instructions that Aaliyah helped translate. As Aaliyah prepared to board the ship, the entire Lurian community gathered to bid her farewell. They sang the wind songs she had come to love, their voices rising and falling in haunting harmony. The children she had played with presented her with small gifts, woven bracelets, carved wooden figures, shimmering stones from the riverbed. Saren approached last, carrying a small wooden box. Inside was a necklace made from one of the luminescent crystals that lit their dwellings. To remember, he said simply, placing it around her neck. Aaliyah hugged him fiercely, then turned and walked up the ramp without looking back, afraid she would lose her courage if she saw his glowing eyes one more time. The journey back to Earth was a blur of medical examinations, debriefings, and psychological evaluations. Aaliyah told her story countless times to military officers, scientists, and government officials. The crystal necklace from Saren was confiscated for study despite her protests, though Captain Key promised it would be returned to her eventually. Her aunt and uncle welcomed her into their home in Seattle, but they were essentially strangers to her. They treated her with kindness, but also with a certain wariness, as if unsure what to make of this child who had lived for years among aliens and who sometimes forgot to speak English. You'll adjust, her Aunt Janet said after finding Aaliyah sleeping on the floor beside her bed for the 3rd night in a row. It just takes time. But how do you adjust to gravity that feels too heavy, to food that tastes too sweet, to a world filled with so many people, so much noise, so many rules that make no sense after the simple life of the Lurian settlement? School was equally challenging. Aaliyah had missed years of formal education, and while the Lurians had taught her many things, mathematics and Earth history had not been among them. The other children found her strange, her mannerisms, her occasional slips into Lurian language, her detailed knowledge of an alien ecosystem, but ignorance of popular culture. Freak, one girl whispered as Aaliyah struggled to use the cafeteria's touchscreen ordering system. She thinks she's special because she lived with aliens. Aaliyah ignored the taunts as best she could, focusing instead on catching up academically. Her experiences had given her a unique perspective that some teachers appreciated, particularly in science classes where her first-hand knowledge of an alien ecosystem proved valuable. 6 months after her return to Earth, Aaliyah was called to a special meeting at Earth Alliance headquarters. Captain Key was there, along with several high-ranking officials she didn't recognize. "Aaliyah," the captain said warmly, "you've become quite famous, you know. The girl who survived 3 years on an alien world." She shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just want my necklace back." One of the officials, a stern-looking woman with short silver hair, spoke up. "The artifact is still being studied, but that's not why we brought you here today." She slid a tablet across the table. "We'd like you to look at these images and tell us what you see." On the screen were satellite photos of Tarian 5, focused on the area where the Lurian settlement had been. Except now, surrounding the familiar concentric circles of dwellings, were what appeared to be human structures, prefabricated buildings, landing pads, even what looked like mining equipment. "What is all this?" Aaliyah asked, a sense of dread building in her stomach. Captain Key had the decency to look uncomfortable. "After our initial contact, Earth Alliance sent a full diplomatic mission to establish formal relations with the Lurians. During geological surveys, we discovered that Tarian 5 is rich in certain rare minerals, essential for our newer FTL drive systems." "You're mining their planet?" Aaliyah's voice rose in disbelief. "With their permission," the silver-haired woman interjected smoothly. "We've signed treaties. They're being well compensated with technology, medical supplies, educational resources." "The Lurians don't care about technology," Aaliyah said. "They live in harmony with their environment. That's their way." "Progress is inevitable," said another official, a balding man with cold eyes, "and beneficial for all parties. The Lurians will be brought into the galactic community. Their lives will improve immeasurably." "Have you asked them if they want their lives improved?" Aaliyah demanded. The conversation continued in this vein for some time, with the officials attempting to convince her of the mutual benefits of the arrangement, while Aaliyah grew increasingly distressed. Eventually, Captain Key escorted her out of the meeting. "I'm sorry," he said quietly when they were alone. "I know this isn't what you envisioned for your friends. They'll destroy everything that makes the Lurians who they are," Aaliyah said bitterly. "Just like humans always do." The captain sighed. "It's complicated, Aaliyah. There are forces at work beyond what you understand." He hesitated, then added, "And there are other concerns. We're not the only spacefaring race in this sector. Some are far less benevolent than humanity." Before she could ask what he meant, her aunt arrived to take her home. But the captain's cryptic warning stayed with her. Over the next 3 years, Aaliyah threw herself into her studies with singular focus. She learned everything she could about interspecies diplomacy, galactic politics, and the legal frameworks governing human interactions with newly discovered intelligent life. If knowledge was power, she would arm herself to protect the Lurians. Regular reports from Tarian 5 showed the human presence expanding steadily. The mining operations grew, and with them came infrastructure changes, roads cutting through forests of silver trees, water purification systems altering the chemistry of rivers, artificial lighting dispelling the darkness that the Lurians had navigated by the glow of their eyes for generations. Each report made Aaliyah more determined to return and advocate for her adopted people. She petitioned the Earth Alliance repeatedly for permission to visit Tarian 5, but was denied each time with vague explanations about ongoing diplomatic sensitivities and security concerns. Then came the day when all screens on Earth simultaneously broadcast an emergency message from the Alliance Defense Command. An unknown alien fleet had entered the Tarian system and opened fire on the human settlement there without provocation. The attackers called themselves Azorians, a species previously unknown to humanity, but apparently a major power in the sector. Grainy footage showed massive ships with blade-like protrusions firing on the human buildings around the Lurian settlement. Brief glimpses of ground combat revealed the attackers, hulking reptilian beings with reinforced exoskeletons, wielding energy weapons far more advanced than human technology. Aaliyah watched in horror as the place she had once called home burned. The news reported that the Earth Alliance was mounting a defensive operation, but it would take time for reinforcements to reach the remote system. "This is exactly what Captain Key warned me about," she whispered to herself as she watched the footage play on repeat. In the background, military experts speculated about the Zorians' motives, but Aaliyah already suspected the truth. The mining operations had attracted unwanted attention. For 3 agonizing weeks, Aaliyah barely slept. She haunted the Earth Alliance information centers, demanding updates that never came. The official channels remained frustratingly vague about the situation on Tarian 5, citing operational security. Then suddenly, she was summoned again to Alliance headquarters. This time, only Captain Key awaited her. "We've stabilized the situation on Tarian 5, he said without preamble. "But at great cost. Many human lives were lost, as well as many Lurians." Aaliyah's heart constricted. "Saren." "He lives," the captain assured her. "In fact, he specifically asked for you. That's why I've brought you here. We're sending a diplomatic vessel back to Tarion 5 to negotiate a more formal defensive alliance against the Zorian threat. I think having you aboard might help ease tensions." 2 days later, Aaliyah found herself on a sleek diplomatic vessel bound for Tarion 5. Her aunt and uncle had protested, but the alliance had been persuasive, arguing that her unique relationship with the Lurians made her presence essential. As they approached the planet, evidence of the recent battle became apparent. Debris from destroyed ships littered the outer atmosphere, and Alliance vessels maintained a defensive perimeter around the planet. "The Zorians hit us hard and fast," explained Commander Bryce, the vessel's security officer. "If not for the Lurians' knowledge of the terrain and their warning system, we might have lost the entire settlement." Aaliyah's chest swelled with pride at these words. The Lurians, with their simple weapons and luminescent eyes, had stood against a technologically superior force to protect their home, and, by extension, their human visitors. The landing was nothing like Aaliyah remembered from her childhood. Instead of the peaceful forest clearing, they touched down on a proper landing pad amidst a sprawling human settlement that had grown up around the original Lurian village. Many of the human structures showed battle damage: scorched walls, collapsed roofs, impact craters. When the ramp lowered, Aaliyah was the first one off the ship. A group of Lurians waited nearby, and at their center stood Saren. 6 years had passed since she'd seen him last, and time had left its mark. New scars crisscrossed his blue skin, and he leaned on a staff, suggesting an injury to one of his legs. A jagged scar ran across his face, narrowly missing one of his glowing eyes. But those eyes still glowed with the same gentle light she remembered, and when he saw her, they brightened visibly. "Aaliyah of Earth," he said, his English much improved. "You have returned as promised." She ran to him, forgetting all protocol, and embraced him as she had when she was a child. "I'm so sorry about all of this," she whispered. "There is much to discuss," Saren replied gravely. "Come, the elders wait." The meeting took place in a new structure that combined human and Lurian architectural elements. A dome made from the silver trees, but reinforced with metal and synthetic materials. Inside, Lurian elders sat alongside Earth Alliance officers around a circular table. Captain Key presented the Alliance's proposal, a formal defensive pact against the Saurians, including permanent military installations on Tarion 5 and accelerated technology sharing. The Lurian elder, who appeared to be their leader, not the same one Aaliyah remembered from her childhood, listened intently before responding through a translator. "We have already paid a heavy price for our association with humans. Many of our people died defending your mining operations, which we never truly wanted on our world." Tension filled the room. Captain Key began to formulate a diplomatic response, but Aaliyah spoke first. "May I ask what the Zorians said when they attacked? Did they give a reason?" The elder turned to her, recognition dawning. "You are the human child Saren sheltered. You speak our tongue." Aaliyah nodded and repeated her question in Lurian, her accent rusty but understandable. "They said we had betrayed our neutrality by allying with the humans," the elder replied in the same language. "They said we would be the first example in their campaign to purge human influence from this sector." Captain Key looked between them, frustrated at being unable to follow the conversation. "What's he saying?" Aaliyah translated, then added, "The Zorians didn't just attack because of the mining operations. They attacked because the Lurians helped humans, because they helped me. They're making an example of anyone who allies with humanity." As the implications of this sank in, a commotion outside interrupted the meeting. A soldier burst in, his uniform torn and bloody. Zorian ships have broken through the defensive line. They're landing troops on the northern continent. The room erupted into activity. Officers rushed to establish communication with their fleet, while Lurian elders called for their warriors to prepare defenses. Aaliyah turned to Sarin. We need to get somewhere safe. But Sarin was already strapping on a simple armor made of hardened tree bark. I must join our defenders, he said. You should return to your ship. I'm not leaving you again, Aaliyah insisted. Before they could argue further, the ground shook with the impact of nearby explosions. The battle had reached them faster than anyone anticipated. What followed was chaos. Aaliyah found herself running alongside Sarin through the burning settlement as Zorian troops pushed forward. The hulking reptilian warriors towered over both humans and Lurians, their natural armor deflecting most conventional weapons. Their eyes, Sarin shouted to the defending Lurians. Aim for their eyes. The Lurians responded by intensifying the glow from their own eyes to blinding levels, momentarily disorienting the advancing Zorians. In that moment of confusion, Lurian spear throwers launched their crystalline-tipped weapons with deadly accuracy, finding the vulnerable spots between armor plates. Aaliyah and Sarin took shelter in a partially collapsed building where several injured Lurians and humans were already hiding. Among them was a Zorian soldier, separated from its unit and badly wounded. The human soldiers wanted to finish it off, but Sarin intervened. We are not killers of the defenseless, he said firmly. To Aaliyah's surprise, he began treating the Zorian's wounds with the same healing pace that had once saved her leg. The Zorian watched with obvious confusion as its enemy provided medical care. It spoke in a guttural language that neither Aaliyah nor the humans understood, but Sarin nodded as if he comprehended. Their language has similarities to ancient Lurian, he explained to Aaliyah. This one is asking why we help it when we should be taking its life. Sarin responded to the Zorian in a mixture of its language and his own. The reptilian being's expression, difficult to read on its alien face, seemed to shift from confusion to something like curiosity. What did you tell it? Aaliyah asked. That all life is worthy of compassion, Sarin replied simply. It is the foundation of Lurian belief. We harm only to defend, never from hatred or fear. The next few hours were tense as they remained in hiding, listening to the sounds of battle moving back and forth through the settlement. The wounded Zorian drifted in and out of consciousness, while Sarin continued to tend to it and the other injured. Eventually, the sounds of fighting receded, replaced by the more organized movements of cleanup operations. A squad of Alliance soldiers found their hideout and were shocked to discover the enemy combatant being treated alongside their own wounded. What is the meaning of this? Demanded their commander. Captain Key, who had arrived with the squad, assessed the situation quickly. Stand down, he ordered. We're taking all the wounded back to the medical facility, including the Zorian. Sir, with all due respect, that's an order, Commander. We're not executing prisoners of war, and we're certainly not preventing medical treatment for the injured, regardless of species. The decision to treat wounded Zorians alongside humans and Lurians proved to be a turning point. Word spread through the Zorian ranks about the unexpected mercy shown to their injured. While the battle continued in space and in other regions of the planet, a curious stalemate developed in the main settlement area. 3 days after the initial assault, a Zorian commander requested a parley. In a tense meeting held on neutral ground between the lines, the massive reptilian leader faced off against Captain Key and the Lurian elders. Your behavior is not as our intelligence suggested, the Zorian said through a translation device. Our reports indicated humans exploit and abandon allies once resources are extracted. Yet you fight alongside the blue ones and treat our wounded when you could eliminate them. Captain Key straightened to his full height, still a head shorter than the Zorian. Humanity has made many mistakes in its history, but we learn from them. The Lurians protected one of our children when she was helpless. In return, we've declared their entire species under our protection. The Zorian commander considered this. Protection implies dominance. The blue ones are not your subordinates? Sarin stepped forward. We are allies by choice, equal partners who respect each other's strengths and differences. The Zorian's multifaceted eyes shifted to Sarin, then to Aaliyah, who stood nearby. You are the human child who lived among the blue ones? It asked, its translator rendering the words in harsh, mechanical English. I am, Aaliyah confirmed, meeting its gaze steadily. Our intelligence indicated that humans abandoned you here, that they came back only when resources were discovered. The Zorian's head tilted in what might have been confusion. Yet you stand with them now. Because they came back, Aaliyah said simply. They never stopped looking for survivors. And when they found me, they respected the people who had saved me. That's what allies do. They recognize debts that can never truly be repaid. The negotiations that followed were complex and frequently stalled, but ultimately productive. The Zorians agreed to withdraw from Tarian 5, maintaining the planet as a neutral zone. In exchange, humans would scale back their mining operations to levels approved by the Lurian Council and would share certain medical technologies that had impressed the Zorians. As the last Zorian ships departed the system 2 weeks later, Aaliyah stood with Saren watching the green sky return to its natural state, free of the scars of battle. What happens now? She asked. Saren's glowing eyes studied her face. You have grown much since you were the small one in the crash pod. Soon you will be an adult by human standards. I want to stay, Aaliyah said impulsively. I could be a liaison between our peoples, help prevent misunderstandings like the ones that led to this conflict. Your place is not here, not yet, Saren said gently. You must complete your education. Learn the ways of your own people fully before you can truly bridge our worlds. Deep down, Aaliyah knew he was right. I'll come back, she promised again. Of this I have no doubt, Saren replied. Back on Earth, Aaliyah approached her studies with renewed purpose. She specialized in xenodiplomacy and interspecies communication, becoming one of the youngest students ever admitted to the prestigious Galactic Relations Academy. Her experiences on Tarian 5 gave her unique insights that her professors valued, though some of her classmates still viewed her with a mixture of fascination and suspicion. The girl who had lived among aliens remained an oddity, neither fully human in her perspectives nor truly alien. During her final year at the academy, news came of another conflict brewing in a distant sector. A species calling themselves the Harvesters had begun systematically stripping resources from inhabited worlds, displacing or eliminating native populations as they went. Their philosophy, intercepted in fragmentary communications, seemed to be that all other sentient life existed merely to serve their needs. The Earth Alliance, remembering the lessons of Tarian 5, proposed a joint defensive initiative, not just humans and Lurians this time, but a coalition of species concerned about the Harvester threat. To Aaliyah's surprise, the Saurians were among the first to join. Upon graduation, Aaliyah was immediately commissioned as a diplomatic officer and assigned to the newly formed Guardian Fleet, a multinational, multi-species force dedicated to protecting vulnerable worlds from exploitation and aggression. Her first posting brought her back to Tarian 5, now designated as the Guardian Fleet's headquarters due to its strategic location and symbolic importance as the birthplace of the Human-Lurian Alliance. The settlement had changed again in her absence. The mining operations had been scaled back as promised, and in their place stood training facilities and diplomatic halls where representatives from dozens of species came to learn the principles of peaceful coexistence. Saren, now an elder himself, had become the head of the Lurian Diplomatic Corps. His once vibrant blue skin had faded with age, and the glow of his eyes had dimmed, but his mind remained sharp as ever. "Welcome home, Aaliyah of Earth," he said when she reported for duty. Or perhaps I should say Commander Summers now. Aaliyah smiled, touching the luminescent crystal that still hung around her neck. "Just Aaliyah to you, always." The years that followed were filled with both triumphs and challenges. The Guardian Fleet expanded its influence, mediating conflicts and preventing exploitation across multiple sectors. Aaliyah rose through the ranks, her unique background making her particularly effective at finding common ground between disparate species. The Harvesters proved to be a more formidable threat than initially anticipated. Their technology was advanced, and their worldview left little room for negotiation. They saw other species not as potential allies or even enemies to be respected, but as resources to be consumed. A decade after joining the Guardian Fleet, now Admiral Aaliyah Summers stood on the bridge of the flagship Horizon, watching as her fleet moved into position around a contested world in the Vega sector. At 40, she cut an imposing figure in her admiral's uniform, the luminescent crystal from Tarian 5 still hanging around her neck after all these years. "The Zorian delegation is ready to begin negotiations, Admiral," reported her executive officer, Commander Jackson. "And the Centauri representatives?" "Waiting in the secondary conference room as requested. They're not happy about being kept separate from the Zorians." Aaliyah nodded. "They'll be even less happy if they start shooting at each other before we can establish terms. Maintain the buffer zone between their fleets." The door to the bridge slid open, admitting her most trusted advisor. Saren had aged significantly in the past 2 decades. The blue of his skin had faded to a paler shade, and the glow of his eyes had dimmed. But he moved with the same fluid grace, and his mind remained as sharp as ever. The situation mirrors what happened on Tarian 5 all those years ago, he observed, standing beside her at the viewport. But this time we have the experience to prevent escalation. Let's hope so, Aaliyah replied. The Centauri aren't as reasonable as the Lurians, and the Zorians have grown more aggressive under their new leadership. Together, they made their way to the main conference room where representatives from both species awaited. The negotiations would be delicate, with territorial disputes and resource rights at stake. But the Guardian fleet had earned a reputation for fairness and strength that gave its mediators considerable influence. As they walked, Saren spoke quietly. There is something I must tell you, Aaliyah of Earth. Something I have waited many years to share. That sounds ominous, she said, trying to keep her tone light despite the seriousness in his voice. The Lurians are more than we appear to be, Saren said. We are the keepers of memories, the last remnants of civilizations long vanished from the galaxy. Our glowing eyes are not merely biological, they are repositories of knowledge passed down through countless generations. Aaliyah stopped walking, staring at her old friend in shock. What are you saying? We have watched many species rise and fall, some through natural disaster, others through war or self-destruction. We observed humanity from afar for centuries, uncertain whether you would be different. And then I crashed into your world, Aaliyah said slowly. Saren nodded. One small human child, injured and afraid. The elders wished to leave you to your fate, another data point in the long history of species that could not transcend their limitations. But I argued that any species capable of producing such resilient young deserved a chance to prove itself. The implications were staggering. You've been testing us all this time? Not testing, hoping. Saren's eyes glowed a fraction brighter. When your Captain Key extended protection to our entire species based on our treatment of a single child, when humans fought alongside us against the Zorians and showed mercy to defeated enemies, we saw something we had rarely witnessed in our long observation of galactic civilizations. What was that? Aaliyah asked. The capacity to extend compassion beyond your own kind, to see value in difference rather than threat. It is rarer than you might imagine. A signal from the conference room indicated the delegates were growing impatient. Aaliyah knew she should hurry, but this revelation demanded attention. Why tell me this now? Saren placed a blue hand on her shoulder, the gesture reminiscent of her childhood on Tarian 5. Because today you will help broker a peace between species that have been enemies for generations. The work we began 20 years ago has grown into something that could reshape this sector of the galaxy. And because he hesitated, suddenly looking every year of his considerable age. My time grows short, Aaliyah. I wished you to know the truth before I joined the ancestral memory. Tears threatened, but Aaliyah blinked them away. There would be time for grief later. Now they had work to do. Then let's make sure this piece is worthy of remembrance, she said, squaring her shoulders and entering the conference room. The negotiations lasted 3 days, testing Aaliyah's patience and diplomatic skills to their limits. The Zorians and Centauri had legitimate grievances against each other, and centuries of mistrust weren't easily overcome. But slowly progress was made. Territorial boundaries were established, resource-sharing agreements drafted, and security protocols put in place to prevent future conflicts. On the final day, as the delegates prepared to sign the Treaty of Vega, Saren collapsed. Aaliyah rushed to his side as medical personnel converged on them. There is nothing they can do, Saren whispered, his voice barely audible. But do not grieve over much. I go to join the collective memory of my people. You can't die now, Aaliyah said fiercely, gripping his hand. We have so much more to accomplish. Saren's eyes flared briefly, their glow stronger than it had been in years. You will continue the work. The Covenant of Unity awaits your signature, the formal alliance between humans and Lurians that will serve as a beacon to other species. I'll sign it, Aaliyah promised, as soon as you're better. But they both knew he wouldn't recover. With a final surge of strength, Saren placed his hand over the crystal at her throat. This contains a fragment of my personal memory. Keep it close, and in some small way, I will always be with you. His eyes dimmed for the last time, the glow fading until only the natural blue of his irises remained. Aaliyah felt a piece of her heart break away. the loss of her oldest friend creating a void that couldn't be filled. The signing ceremony was delayed out of respect, but proceeded the following day with a somber tone. Aaliyah performed her duties mechanically, her thoughts still with Soren. After the Saurian and Centauri delegates departed, she retreated to her quarters aboard the Horizon. There, waiting on her desk, was an official communication from Earth Alliance Command in a small wooden box that looked Lurian in origin. She opened the box first. Inside was an ancient scroll made from the fibers of Tarion V's silver trees. Unrolling it carefully, she found text in both Lurian and English, the covenant of unity that Saren had mentioned, ready for her signature as the human representative. The document formalized the partnership between their species but went further, establishing a framework for including other peaceful civilizations in what it called the Assembly of Guardians. It was visionary in scope, looking beyond immediate defensive concerns to a future where diverse species could collaborate while maintaining their unique cultures. Next, she opened the communication from Earth. It was brief and to the point. A new threat had been detected at the edge of explored space. A species calling themselves the Harvesters had destroyed 3 outposts in the past month. Early intelligence suggested they viewed all other sentient life as resources to be exploited rather than equals to be respected. Aaliyah touched the crystal at her throat, feeling its warmth against her skin. "We'll face this together," she whispered, "just as we always have." She signed the covenant, then turned to the viewport where stars streaked by as the Horizon traveled through hyperspace. Somewhere out there, a new challenge awaited. But this time, humanity wouldn't face it alone. The Guardian fleet, humans and Lurians together, with perhaps the Zorians and Centauri someday joining their ranks, would stand as a bulwark against those who would destroy rather than create, who would dominate rather than cooperate. Aaliyah gave the order to set course for the threatened sector. As the massive ship changed direction, she thought of the frightened 7-year-old girl who had once huddled in an escape pod on an alien world. That girl could never have imagined where her journey would lead, to the bridge of a starship, to the founding of an interspecies alliance, to a future filled with both peril and promise. But one thing remained constant, the lessons she had learned on Tarion 5 all those years ago. Compassion, extended even to those most different from ourselves, could change not just individuals, but entire civilizations. It was a lesson worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. And as the Horizon accelerated toward its destination, Aaliyah Summers, once the sole survivor of the Orion, now Admiral of the Guardian Fleet, prepared to do exactly that.